Hola clase! Today we're going to talk about Spanish accent rules. How do you know when to use an accent mark in Spanish? Quiero que tengan éxito con acentos. There are two rules that indicate stress in Spanish, and if either of these rules are not followed, an accent must be used. Rule number one, if a word ends in a vowel, N or S, the normal stress is on the second to last syllable, which is called the penultimate syllable in fancy words. Most words in Spanish will fit this category. Let's look at a few examples. Leche. I hear the stress here. Ropa. Toma. Come. Zapato. Look, second to last. Caballo. Second to last, because these follow the vowel or N or S rule number one. Let's look at rule number two. If the word ends in any other letter than those mentioned above, the normal stress will fall on the last syllable. Soñar, beber, dormir, comer, ferrocarril. Stress falls on the end. Okay, let's look at some words that fall outside those rules and why you would use accents. Look down at the bottom at the words in pink. Común. It ends in an N, so I know it has to follow rule number one, but it's pronounced with the stress on the end of the word, so therefore it requires an accent. Lápiz. It ends in a Z, so I know it has to follow rule number two, with the stress falling on the last syllable, but it doesn't, so it needs an accent mark to differentiate it. Médico. It ends in an O, so I know it has to follow rule number one, but the stress falls on the beginning of the word. Médico. It needs an accent mark. Inglés. It ends in an S. It has to follow rule number one, but it doesn't. The stress comes at the end of the word. It needs an accent mark to differentiate it. And ojalá, stress coming at the end of the word. It breaks the rule. If the word breaks the rule, it gets an accent mark to indicate where the spoken stress comes in. What are the reasons we add accents in Spanish? Well, if we have an identical word and the accent is used to distinguish one word from the other. What am I talking about? Let's look at some examples. De and day, the word of versus to give. Say, the reflexive pronoun, versus say as in I know. Si and si, if and yes. Me and me, my and me. Or finally, te, to you, versus te, the drink. In Spanish, accents are used to differentiate between the same spellings. Also, watch out for the verb estar and the demonstrative pronouns. That's very confusing for English speakers because the verb estar has an accent mark in several of its forms. And sometimes people confuse it with the demonstrative pronouns esta, estas, estos, etc. Okay, we'll talk about that in another video. Let's move on. We add accents when pronouns are added to a verb form. For example, diciéndolo, diciéndolo. Explique más me, explíqueme. Dámelo, dámelo. Estás lavándote, estás lavándote. An accent is added to maintain the original stress of the verb. We add accents when there are two weak vowels. You and I are weak. That's an important one to remember. I'm going to give you a little more information on this here because I think it's important. We have strong vowels in Spanish, and those are A, E, and O. They are usually separated and they can form two different syllables. The weak vowels, which are I and U, and Y often serves as a weak vowel as well, functioning in the same way as an I. The basic rule of vowel combinations in syllables is that two strong vowels cannot be in the same syllable, so that when two strong vowels are next to each other, they are considered to belong to separate syllables. But other combinations, such as a strong and a weak vowel or two weak vowels, are considered to form a single syllable. In some words, a strong and weak vowel or two weak vowels don't merge together, but instead they form separate syllables. And in those cases, a written accent mark over the weak vowel is used to show the distinction. A common example is the name Maria. Without the accent mark, the name would be pronounced like Maria. In effect, the accent mark turns the I into a strong vowel sound. Other words where an accent mark is used to keep a weak vowel from becoming part of a diphthong includes, for example, Rio, heroína, duo, and país. Do you see how I'm making that strong, accentuated sound? Let's look at words down on the bottom in the blue. I added some words where the two vowel sounds together make a diphthong. That's a diphthong. What's a diphthong, everybody's saying? That's when two vowels are put together to form another sound. Look what happens when we don't accentuate the vowel. Puerto. That sounds like a W. Tierra. That sounds like a Y. Siete. That sounds like a Y. Ay. Cuida. Can you hear? Listen how those two vowels together form a separate sound. Ciudad, labio, asilla. Okay? These are forming separate sounds. In English, we have the same exact thing. We have diphthongs as well. Remember, you and I are weak vowels, and they have to be accentuated oftentimes in a sentence. Within the word itself to make sense. Okay? To turn that I or you into a strong vowel. Muy bien. We also use accents when asking a question. All interrogative question words have a written accent to signal that someone is asking a question and not just making a statement. Como, how or what. Cuál, cuáles, which ones. Cuándo, when. Cuánto, cuántas. Cuántos, how much, how many. Dónde, qué, quién, y por qué. When you see those question marks, you need to add an accent mark. Muy bien. There are three types of accents in Spanish. These are the official terms. Aguda, where the stress comes on the final syllable, and we talked about that, which is any other letter besides the vowels N or S. Grave, stress, which comes on the second to last syllable, and those were words that end in vowels N or S. And agudas and graves will have an accent when they violate the intonation rules. Okay, so you're going to place an accent on anything that doesn't follow those rules. Then we also have the esdrújula, where the stress is placed on the third to last syllable, or any syllable further from the end of the word. And those words will always take an accent. Muy bien. How does this relate in English? I always like to put Spanish and English together to see how we can wrap our mind around this. Believe it or not, we have accent rules in English too. We just don't mark them like they do in Spanish. Let's look at this example. I want to buy an old record at the shop, and I want to record the music onto a CD. Isn't that interesting? I hear accent marks going on there. I want to buy an old record. I'm putting stress here. I'm just not accenting it. If this were Spanish, it would have an accent mark here. And I want to record the music onto a CD. Then I'm putting the stress over here. And if this were Spanish, there'd be an accent mark on this side. So we actually do have something very similar in English. It's just not written down. Excelente. Vamos a ver. Muy bien, gracias chicos y chicas. Adiós.